Fred, we're rolling.
Okay.
Fred.
Yeah.
Today is September 25th.
Fifth.
Thank you. 2018. We're at the house of Fred Levinson, correct?
Correct.
In San Francisco. Fred, can you begin by telling me where and when you were born?
I was born in Boston in 1928.
In Boston in 1928?
Yes, Boston, Mass.
1928. What kind of house did you grow up in?
I grew up mostly in a three-story.
Look at me.
In a three-story.
You can even turn around a little if you want. Yeah, exactly. There we go. Perfect. Much better.
Three-story building, 3 flats, a typical building in Boston in the neighborhood Roxbury where I lived, Roxbury and Dorchester.
What kind of house? Were you the oldest or you the youngest?
I was the oldest of 4 boys.
Wow.
Uh-huh. And my mother was a school teacher.
And your father?
He was in the insurance business.
And where are your parents from?
My mother was born in Boston, and my father came from Lithuania when he was 14 years old.
So your mother was like a real Bostonian?
Yes, uh-huh.
And how would you say your house was as far as Judaism, Zionism, kosher, non-kosher, observant, non-observant? How would you describe your
We're a very Jewish home, kosher, Orthodox. And there was a synagogue right behind our house where we went. And my mother was a very strong, committed Zionist. And so...
And your father?
My father, he wasn't an activist, but he went along with the...
So she was the one who set the tone?
Yes, definitely.
When you say activist and involved, was she like in Hadassah? Was she...
Very much so. She was dedicated to Hadassah and other community organizations. And then my grandmother was one of the founders of the Jewish Ladies Free Loan, the Gemillah Chesed, and my mother worked in that office for a few years. My mother was a teacher in the public schools in Boston, and then later on in her career she worked in a Hebrew day school, which was founded by Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was a very prominent rabbi in those days.
And your father's in the insurance business. What's the Jewish community like in Boston?
It's one of
You're growing up.
It was and is one of the strongest Jewish communities in the country. We had a lot of prominent Jews who were wealthy and very committed to Israel, and so the community was very motivated towards Israel.
So you grew up...
Palestine, you could say. Right.
So you grew up with Zionism embedded in you, basically.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, did you go to a public school?
I went to public school, yes.
Did you go to Sunday school?
Hebrew school.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hebrew.
Every Sunday?
No, it was after school. I think we went maybe 3 days a week.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a little vague, but we went through the drill, and I really didn't learn that much, except I learned the alphabet. I could read, I could follow the service in the synagogue.
Did you guys go to synagogue often?
Well, of course, we went on the holidays and bar mitzvahs and celebrations and that type of thing. My Boy Scout troop met at the synagogue, and that brought us there.
What can you tell? So, and you have 4 brothers that are younger than you, and does the Great Depression hit your family?
Yeah, we were very poor, very poor. My father wasn't a very good provider, and I began delivering newspapers when I was 9 years old.
You had a route?
I had several routes by the time I finished my newspaper career.
How long did that last for?
Oh, it lasted till about when I was 14.
Wow. And the money went to your home, to the home.
Right.
So you learned at a very young age that it's the classic story. I got a route, I got 2 routes, I got 3 routes.
Right. Exactly, yeah.
Were you close to your parents?
I'm very close to mother.
Mm-hmm.
Not so close to my father. He
So
was
during the Depression, it was hard times.
very, very hard. Yeah, we just scraped by, but my mother was an excellent manager, and somehow she kept us well fed. We weren't really well dressed or anything like that, but we were
You
introduced.
didn't go to sleep hungry.
Yeah, my mother.
And tell me, did you belong to, and you belong to the Scouts, right? You go to the Scouts as a kid?
Well, as a kid,
As a kid?
Cub Scouts, Boy
Cub
Scouts.
Scouts, yeah.
Right.
But no Jewish,
Well, as I got older, I was in the Zionist organization, General Zionist and Labor Zionist, Habonim.
Habonim, sure.
Yeah, and then when I went off to school, I was active in ISFA.
What's that?
That was the Zionist IZFA. I forget the
Was
letters.
this high school
No,
or university?
college, yeah.
College.
And yeah, so my younger brothers too were indoctrinated in Zionism and very deeply, and so we were brought up that way, and
Okay.
it stayed with me all these years.
Of course, this is not connected, but I'm just going to ask you, I'm sure you're a Boston Red Sox fan?
Yeah, Patriots.
Not a Boston Braves?
Well, now
They
it's
were around.
Atlanta. Yeah, well, of course, I went to 5 cents, 10 cents to get into the game, not whole league. Yeah, definitely.
When World War II breaks out, let's put it this way, do you remember hearing any talk in the House about what's going on in Nazi Germany before the war? Like Kristallnacht, 37, 38, 39.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember? Like,
Yes, we definitely, we knew some families who had got out of Germany before it was too late, and so my parents were friendly with several families, and
refugees,
yes, Jews.
basically.
Yeah, sure. We were very familiar
with the situation.
with what was going on,
And when America finally enters the war in 1941, you're of course too young to go in to the army.
exactly. But I distinctly remember Pearl Harbor when they announced on the radio, and
It was on
President
Sunday.
Roosevelt, yeah. So I remember that. I happened to be with my grandmother at that
Really,
time.
yeah?
Uh-huh. So, and then when I got out of high school, I was only 15.
How come you graduated early?
I had moved fast.
You were accelerated? You were
yeah,
accelerated?
Yeah, skipped a grade. And
What year do you finish high school?
1944.
And you're 15 years old.
Right.
16.
44.
You were born in 28.
No, I was 15. My
And a half.
birthday was in August.
Okay.
So I was still 15.
Okay.
And then I went to work for the Army for a year.
What'd you do?
I was worked on port of embarkation, the Army, where they loaded the ships. And I was just a kid, but I had 50 POWs working under me.
POWs?
Yeah, Italian POWs. And I was classified as, I was with a group of carpenters. I was a laborer. And
what were the POWs building?
Well, no, they were working in the yard there and helping loading the ships. The Army used them for labor. Yeah, so...
Did you have any interaction with them?
Well, on a social basis.
Yeah.
They were very nice.
The Italians?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, it was all a new experience for me. I was just a kid, and I worked with a group of older men who had been around. I learned a lot,
What'd you learn?
about life.
Tell me.
Well, how to get along with people and how to do your job and there were social things mostly. I was going to go to college and I had to support myself, so by working there I saved up enough money to go off to college. It was a very good experience.
You went to college early.
Yeah, well, I went to college the next year.
1945?
Yeah, so...
What does Fred want to learn? What does he want to study?
Well, at that point, I didn't know exactly what I would really end up doing. So I went off to college looking for a liberal education, and I started off that way.
Where?
And I went to the library and I researched and found that I could go to the University of Oklahoma for $50 a semester. And the housing was so inexpensive that I knew that was, the way I was going to go. So that's what I did. I went off to the University of Oklahoma.
1945?
Yeah.
And what are you majoring in, or you're just studying?
I took liberal arts,
Liberal arts.
language and economics and statistics and, the usual. And so I was there, and I spent the freshman year there, and then I went back, at the end of the freshman year, I went into the Army. I volunteered to get the GI Bill. So I went in the Army, and I went overseas to Korea, and then I came back, and my brother, next to me in age, he was 22 months younger, and he went to the University of Oklahoma, and so we both were there together. I was a sophomore, and he was a freshman.
Wait, but you went to Korea before the Korean War?
Yeah, it was
46,
48. And so I came back and joined him at University of Oklahoma. And I had a friend who had made Aliyah to Israel. I met him through the Student Zionist organization. We were good friends. And he wrote me and said they needed volunteers in Israel. They were ramping up. And this was in beginning of 48. And so I went, my brother and I both applied for passports, and we couldn't get them at that time. The State Department was run by some woman who was anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist. We had a very tough time. A few months went by. Finally, I contacted my congressman from Boston, Christian Herter, and we got our passports in a month or two, I forget. And there was an organization that had been set up. It was called Land and Labor. And this agency recruited people to go to Israel to serve in the
Out of New
Haganah.
York.
Huh?
Out of New York, no?
Well, they had a fellow in Boston.
So you left from Oklahoma, you went to Boston?
Well,
Got your
after
passports?
my semester,
Right.
yeah. So this was like June or so, and then
Look at me,
we,
look at me. Yeah.
yeah, and then we went to a summer camp. It was owned by a big Zionist. We were there for a month, and finally,
What'd you do in the summer camp? Where was it? In Boston?
yeah, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. And what did you guys do in this camp?
Well, I was like
Was it called Hachshara?
No, it was a regular summer camp. It was called Tel Noah when I went to, and so in around beginning of August, we were told that we were all set to go.
So Israel has already been declared a state.
Oh
in
yeah,
August,
yeah. And we went to.
What do your parents think about this?
Well, my mother was behind it, 100%. She blessed us. Well, my relatives weren't happy, but my mother was very strong.
But isn't it hush hush? Can't tell anybody because it's the embargo and you can't fight for a foreign country because you're,
Yeah, but
you
once
told
we
me-
got our passports, the passports were restricted. It said there was a big stamp on it, not to travel to the Middle East, and they had the countries named, but it wasn't like it was secret. And we went to New York, and we were told to meet in a certain place, hotel or somewhere, and then there were a whole group of us, and they took us to an estate up in Peekskill, and we were there for a week, and every day, they briefed us about Israel and everything.
the situation. what's going on.
Yeah, and then we went back to New York and got on a ship. It was a student ship, and we were told that there'd be somebody on the dock with a Hebrew newspaper under his arm, and that was contact. And the ship had, 800 passengers, but there were some Jewish fellows that we met on the ship, and everybody had a phony story, what they were going to do. They're going to go to college in Europe. They're going to, So anyway,
What was your cover?
yeah, we said we were going, my brother and I, we were going to go to college in, I think France or something.
Where does the boat go to? Marseille?
Le Havre.
Where?
Le Havre.
Where's
Le-
that?
That's north of Paris. That's where all the passenger ships went, right north of Paris. And
So did you meet the contact guy on the boat?
yeah, and all these other Jewish kids who had their phony stories, they all met the same guy. And so we were all together, and we got on a train and went to Paris. And this Haganah kid was our escort, and he brought us to a hotel. It was like a brothel to spend the night. And so I had become a friend with this fellow from Canada who had already been in the Royal Navy. His name was Joe Myers, and he said to me, we were buddies, he says, Fred, I just read where Tyrone Power was at the George sank, and that's where we're going. He won a lot of money on the ship playing cards.
Who?
This friend of mine, Joe Myers from Canada. In fact, a lot of us thought maybe he was a professional gambler.
So he won a lot of money. So where did he take?
So he says, so we went to the George V, which was the #1 hotel in Paris. And we checked in, and the guy's showing us our room, and he's telling us about all these Nazi generals and everybody that stayed in this room, that room, you know. And then we went out on the town, and we met up with the rest of the guys the next morning, and we took a train to Marseille, and we went to this camp for, it was a staging camp.
Do you remember the name of the camp?
I have it somewhere. Offhand, I don't remember. But there were Jews from North Africa, DPs. There were about 20 Americans. And we were there for 4 or 5 days. And then one day, this fellow came and told me to come with him, and he took 2 or 3 other guys. And we went down to the port of Marseille, and there was a little boat there, like a tub, and it was fitted out as a fishing vessel. It was around 400 feet long. I'll show you a picture. And was called in Hebrew Mishma HaEmek. And there were 2 guys, Haganah guys, who actually were in charge, but there were a couple of Italian men who sailed the boat, you know. And so we stayed on the boat overnight, and then the next day, and the Haganah fellows had to pay off the French police or customs or whatever, and left the port, and we went maybe around 10 miles down the coast. And by that time, it was dusk, and there was a big hill leading, and a road leading down to the quay, and we saw a convoy of trucks, and they came down with 450 people, and in the hold of the boat, there were like shelves, just like in the concentration camps, and these DPs were herded onto the ship. They were screaming when they saw the accommodations. But anyway, we got them all loaded, and we left, and it was about 8 days, 9 days to Israel. We were stopped by British warships, and everybody had to be down under the hold, and just the Italian men up on top, you know, like they were in charge. And finally, we got to Haifa, and we almost sank because everybody was running from side to side. They were so happy, jubilant, yelling, screaming. And we tied up, and it was, we got there, it was a UN truce, you know, for like a week. And meanwhile, we gave our passports to the Haganah guy, and we were named, we got papers, and I was like a German DP, and I was headed for Petach Tikva to a Moshav. That was what...
That was your story.
Story, yeah. So we got off the ship, and they took us to immigrant camp where we were examined. Russian doctors, these women, did physicals on us. And then the volunteers group were taken to an army base called Sarafan, which was outside Tel Aviv.
Yep.
And we were there for a few days. And I had been in the American Army in the military police. So they took me down to Jaffa to the military police headquarters, and they marched me into the office of the commander of the military police. His name was Joshua. Blum.
Plum?
Blum, B-L-U-M.
Blum.
Yeah, and he was a Renaissance man. He was like 6'5". He knew Latin, German. He was the most interesting man I had ever met up to that point.
Where was he from?
He was from Europe originally, but he had made Aliyah to Israel, and he was in the Jewish Brigade, and he was decorated and everything. Oh, and so we got along really good. And he says, "Well, you're going to be in Metzach."
Metzach.
Yeah, which is
משטרה צבאית חוקרת.
exactly, yeah,
A detective.
just like the CID, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell them they can't speak English to you, so you can learn Hebrew. He was great. So I was stationed there with these Israelis. There were a couple of very prominent lawyers. There were a doctor. You know, one guy owned a few hotels. They were older men, but they took me under their wing, and it was very interesting.
What kind of things did you do?
We would go to Arab villages and search for weapons, things like that, or anything that was, you know, not legitimate. And so we went all over the country, and I was paired off with these guys, and I was there in Jaffa, Tel Aviv, so much that I got to know all the pilots, volunteers that were there. I got to know, and all the Americans, they would come to Tel Aviv on their day off. And so I was able, my brother, he was assigned.
Where was your brother stationed?
He was up north in an armored cavalry unit. And so he would come down to Tel Aviv periodically.
There was the Machal Club. Wasn't there a Machal Club on Hayarkon Street?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No. There was there was like an office for the Anglo-Saxons. And so that's where you would go if you needed something. And I had a lot of relatives in Israel who came from Europe. My grandfather, he came from Latvia, but he was from a very big family, and everybody else in the family either went to Africa, South Africa, or they stayed in Europe. And then some of them were able to get out and go to Israel.
What was Tel Aviv like in those days?
Oh, it was great. It was, you know, compared to now, it was like medieval. But the streets of Dizengoff was so popular, and there was a cafe called Cassit, and everybody, artists and everybody, bless you.
Excuse me, thank you.
Artists, it was a real hot spot.
What was the hot spot?
It was called Cassit.
Cassit, yep.
Yeah, and so all those stores were there. One of the men in my unit, he owned a couple of big jewelry stores on Dizengoff. He was very successful. And so they befriended me. I maintained a relationship with them for years until he passed away. And I went back to Israel very often. I've been back 20 times. And I maintained a relationship with all these people, but they're all gone now.
When you were doing your work for the military police,
Yeah.
did you guys ever have any problems in the Arab villages? Was there any...
We never really ran into any big trouble, no. Arabs, they weren't the ones who remained in Israel. They weren't a problem. They very passive, and you know, so many have taken off and left.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the houses had been vacated and Jewish people.
Where did you live in Tel Aviv?
Well, while I was in the Army, I lived in the base.
In Jaffa?
It was on Jaffa Tel Aviv Road, if you know, which led into the clock tower. So
sure,
it was
sure.
right near the clock tower.
Sure.
And the military police headquarters was in, it was like an office building, 3-story building right there, maybe 100 yards from the clock tower. That's where most of the Haganah was.
Did you guys also deal with any prisoners of war?
No.
No.
No, no. No, the unit I was with, a lot of the guys, they went home at night. So it was a good life for them in the Army. And actually I had a car at my disposal. Some unfortunate citizen lost his car to the Army. And so it was very interesting. And meanwhile, I learned Hebrew I was very good conversation Hebrew. When I went back to college, I took some exams and I got a couple of years credit for Hebrew. And so it was very good. Very good. Then I went back, finally, when after everything was settled, I left Israel around April, went to Europe, and went home.
So you were in Israel for about 6 months?
About 8 months, yeah.
8 months? Were you were you ever near any action or something, or was it?
No, the big fights, the big battles were
Down
already.
south?
No, they were already really done. The
Over.
Yeah, I had some friends who were in Latrun, a couple of the American guys who killed there.
Yeah.
And I got there right after that. And I think that was the last big one while I was there. So, and then finally, everything was wound up, and I would have liked to have stayed in Israel, but I wanted to finish school.
So did you go back to school?
Yeah, I did. I went back to college and got a degree.
Your time in the war in Israel.
What about it?
I want to ask you about that time.
Yeah.
The 8 months that you were
Right,
volunteering to fight.
right.
Did it help shape part of who you were? Did you believe that it?
Well, it reinforced all my ideals, definitely. I got a first-hand knowledge of the country and the people and the mores, everything about it. I was a resident in Israel, and being with the Israeli people in my unit, I was living as an Israeli, and it didn't take me long to get a speaking knowledge of Hebrew, and so a number of them took me, made me part of their families. They hosted me, and then my relatives. I had relatives from Rhodesia and South Africa, and they were there in Israel. And then I had a cousin from Latvia, and he was in the Russian army, and he went AWOL and got to Israel, and he was up at Ein Gev. So I went up there a number of times.
So, and did you go to Jerusalem at all that time?
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
Jerusalem was.
Yeah, went to Jerusalem. Well, of course, the new part of Jerusalem. I had a good friend who was studying at university, and he was a prisoner there, you know, in the old city. But I love Jerusalem, right? And yeah, I was there a number of times. I was everywhere in Israel, Beersheba. We found a warehouse with chalava. It was an Arab warehouse full of chalava, so we got a big load of chalava out of it. And yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I've made a lot of trips back to Israel, but it's in my heart. And I've contributed a lot to various causes in Israel. Yes. So then I came out here in 1951 with nothing, and my younger brothers followed me out here, and then my mother and father came out here, and they had a new life, and then we each got married and had children, so we have a big family.
Nice.
Yeah. And it's a very nice community. Back in May, they had a torch lighting ceremony, and so they had me there to light the first torch.
Nice.
Yeah.
On the 70th anniversary?
Yeah. And the Consul General here, the present one, he's great. And so they have a lot of Israel-related events. And I'm treasurer of a PAC, and we support Congress people, not California congressmen, but congressmen, either Republican or Democrat, if they supported Israel.
Sure.
And we give $2,500 to Congress people, $5,000 to senators. So the last few years we've given away a couple $100,000, which is, I'm very proud of that. And I have supported Ben Gurion University in the Negev. I had great experience when I was back in Boston after I got back from Israel. I was contacted, I guess through the Consul General, and Ben Gurion was coming to Boston to launch the bond campaign in the United States. And so the message was that he wanted to meet the Machal people from Boston. And I was like the chair of the group. And so he came to Boston, and he met with us at a hotel, and for around 2.5 hours, talked, joked, wanted us to immigrate, and he was so charming, wonderful. I'll show you a picture.
You have a picture, yeah?
Yeah, and then they said, well, it's time to him to go, And so he said to me, "You come with me." And we got into a limousine, and there's a telephone in the car. It was so novel. And motorcycle escort. We went down Commonwealth Avenue right into the Boston Garden. 10,000 people there. The car drove right into the garden. And we got out, and I sat with him in his box. And he made a speech. Just so great, precious. That was memorable.
All right. We're gonna end the interview, and we're gonna take a picture of that picture.
Yeah, well,
Hold on.
I'll show you what I have.